Hi folks, welcome to Indycar. It's Gordon Ross, the right way around for a change. I've turned my camera phone round so that you can see me as I really am today. I tried this earlier on actually, and then somebody phoned me and interrupted the broadcast, so I didn't really get a chance to say anything to you last time. But I thought I would use this broadcast, this right way around broadcast, to talk about something else. A lot of people ask me questions about how do I convince my friend that things after independence are going to be better than they are now. People ask me about pensions, they ask me about Europe, they ask me about what currency we're going to use, all the same things that they asked in 2014. And so I thought I would look at this a little bit today and give you a few ideas about what you might say to friends who ask you about these things. Now, the first one that everybody seems to want to talk about is what happens to your pension when Scotland becomes independent. Well, it depends which pension you mean. If you're talking about your state pension, that's your old age pension that you get from paying your national insurance contributions while you're working, then that will stay and it will be paid by the Scottish Government after the country becomes independent. So it will continue to be paid by the British Government all the way up to the point where the Scottish Government declares independence, and then it will switch over and you will get your pension directly from the Scottish Benefits Agency, which exists already incidentally and is already giving benefits to people already, just using the existing taxation and benefits devolved powers that we have, which are limited. But after independence they will be complete, so you'll get your pension, your old age pension, directly from the Scottish Government after independence. There's no question about that, because it has to be that way. If you have a private pension as well, if you're lucky enough to have paid into a private pension, that will still be paid anyway because it comes from a company. Companies operate across borders, so it doesn't matter whether you live in England, Scotland, Wales, the continent. If you're paying into a private pension, they will pay you out the money wherever you happen to live in the world. So it doesn't make any difference at all. The next most popular thing that people like to talk about is the currency. What currency will we use? Will we have to use the euro? The answer to this question is no, you don't have to use the euro at all, because for one thing, by the time we are independent, we'll already have left the EU. Because Brexit is already set in motion, the likelihood is Scotland will be out of Europe when it becomes independent anyway. So the first thing you need to know then about currency is it needs to be a new currency, because you could adopt the euro, but it's not mandatory to do that. And think of all the trouble we would have converting all the tills, all the machines, all the cash points, all the problem with printing notes and striking codes. It would be fantastically expensive to switch to the euro. So what can we do? The easiest thing to do is to stick with the Scottish pound. We already have it. We already have, believe it or not, the ability to still print £1 notes. The currency could remain the same, the coinage could remain the same. The only thing that would change, even though we're using the pound as our everyday cash, is the currency would be called the Scottish pound. Now, the Scottish pound would not be in a currency union with the United Kingdom anymore, because, remember, they said they wouldn't do that. And that means that Scotland's currency would be an independent currency, supported by, first of all, the economy of Scotland, its ability to borrow, and its assets, its natural resources. And in a country as wealthy, as naturally wealthy as Scotland, we don't even need to depend on oil for that. So we don't need to have what they call a petrol currency, which is one where, like the dollar, where the dollar's value is linked to the value of oil. And we've all seen how oil can go up and down in value, so we don't want a currency that tracks oil prices. Better that we have an independent Scottish pound, which finds its own level based on what it is actually worth to other people in other countries. Now, that might seem a bit vague to you, but remember that we would have what I would call an electrocurrency. Scotland's biggest resource is going to be its ability to generate massive quantities of spare electricity through its offshore wind turbines and its offshore and nearshore tidal turbines, plus all the other generation capacity that it has from gas and other means of hydroelectrical production. We have a surplus of power in Scotland which we can sell abroad. So our currency the electro pound, if you want to call it that, the Scottish pound, would remain the same. We still use the same banknotes, we still use the same coins, the same cash machines, the tills wouldn't have to be changed. The only thing that would be different is that people coming to Scotland from England would have to get their English pounds changed into Scottish pounds. But apart from that, they wouldn't make any difference. The Scottish pound could even be pegged or track the value of the euro, so that even though we're out of the European Union at the moment, we could have a currency which is broadly in line with the value of the euro. Say a Scottish pound was worth about €1. Believe it or not, the pound coin at the moment is worth about €1 anyway, so it wouldn't take too much to adjust that. So the Scottish pound would be there right from the beginning. All we would need then is a central bank or a treasury in which to put our currency. And that treasury would contain our oil revenues, our gas revenues, any other taxation and any other income that we get as a country from selling our natural resources abroad. So, in this case, in a country as wealthy as Scotland, with as much oil and gas and renewable energy as it has, there's no reason really why, for example, petrol or diesel would necessarily need to be taxed anymore, because we would be making so much taxation from the oil companies anyway that we could ask them just to provide us with petrol at cost price and actually just sell it at the pump for 40 pence a litre in Scotland to people who live here, because in most oil producing countries they pay zero taxation because the oil wealth supports everything that a nation can do. Now, I don't suppose that it's a good idea for Scotland to rely entirely on its oil revenues to do everything it does, but I don't see any reason why we need to tax petrol or diesel for Scottish residents when we are absolutely bathing in the stuff. It's coming in out of the North Sea, and it will be coming from west of Shetland fields as well, and possibly even the west coast of Scotland in the Clyde estuary. After independence, there are oil reserves there too. Okay, what else? Well, we have also got the possibility of nationalising some of these resources so that they are owned by the people, owned by Scotland herself. So imagine for a moment that we took into public ownership all of our renewable energy. Now that would be all of our hydro, all of our solar, all of our tide and all of our wind power. And if all of that was pulled together into one centrally owned company, owned by the state, then all of your energy bills could come down, because you don't need to have profit paid to shareholders when you have a publicly owned utility like that. We used to have a coal board, we used to have an electricity board in the old days. I remember the days when bills were lower and they didn't rise as fast as they do now, and there were only 1 or 2 tariffs. You didn't have to compete with all these different companies offering different tariffs. You have to be a Philadelphia lawyer nowadays to figure out a tariff for an electricity bill. If we have a nationally owned power company that provides electricity to everybody, and even gas to everybody as well, then the prices can come down and stay low forever. So we can have cheap petrol without the heavy taxation, and we can have heating and lighting at an affordable price for everybody regardless of their level of income. What else could you do? Well, what about rail services? What about bus services as well? Would it be worth taking them back into public ownership fully? Now, I realise that the railway in Scotland is technically a publicly owned utility, but Railtrack, which is a British company, as far as I remember, still manages the tracks. The companies who provide the railway service are actually Dutch, even though they're bidding for what is effectively a franchise licence from the Scottish Government to provide a public service. But the point is, all the privatisations and all of these companies that provide services for rail users have put the prices up and up and up. We have the most expensive rail fares anywhere in Europe because they are not publicly owned and they're not subsidised by taxation. I would propose taking the railways fully back into public ownership and making sure that rail fares are the equivalent of bus fares, so that more people come off the roads, more people go onto trains. What other things could you do in an independent Scotland? Well, imagine this. Hands up all those who can't stand their local authority and think that the politicians in their local authority are taking money under false pretences, paying themselves massive wages whilst all around them the roads are full of potholes, the bins are overflowing, street lights are out, pavements are a mess, and we cannot get the kind of local services we need. Well, the answer to that, in my own opinion, is that we scrap local authorities altogether. And instead of having politicians running local services, we have nationally owned agencies. In other words, we would have a public services agency in every town and city, and each one of those publicly owned companies would be responsible for looking after the roads, the pavements, the lighting, the sewerage, everything that we currently take for granted. Education also, I think, should be taken away from local authorities and broadly run by an education department of government, so that there's some consistency everywhere, but also have some local accountability in the schools to allow schools a bit of freedom. But if you take that layer of unnecessary local politics away from councils, imagine if Glasgow City Council had not been run by fat cat Labour councillors for the last 40 or 50 years. What would Glasgow services be like if we were not having to pay massive amounts of money to all these councillors who go on junkets and waste money on expenses, who fight each other in by-elections and are constantly trying to get us to vote for them? Imagine how much better your services could be if the politics was removed completely and we simply paid for services only. And those services could be cheaper because we wouldn't have this layer of extra politicians arguing constantly with each other over budgets. Each individual service provider would be given exactly what it needed to run its services. Local government effectively would disappear. Scottish Government would liaise with these local agencies to find out what they needed and provide it directly. There would be no political infighting between Labour and SNP or Conservative and SNP. There would be no coalitions of unionist parties against the SNP trying to wrestle control of the budget away. That could go. And in fact, that really should go. There's no reason for it to exist. So these are just some of the ideas that cross my mind when people ask me, what do you say to people when you want them to vote for independence? What do you say to them will happen? And the answers are simple. Their pensions will be safe. The Scottish Government is bound to pay their pensions because it will be de facto the government of Scotland after independence. It may not be an SNP government. It might be a coalition. It might be run by Labour or some new party that's formed after independence. We don't know that. But the point is that your pension is safe. It will come from central government treasury, just like it does from London, except it'll be coming from Edinburgh. We don't need to worry about fuel bills because, as I say, we're bathing in oil and we are choking on the amount of gas that we've got coming out of the North Sea. Those people who say that oil and gas are running out, they're not right. Oil and gas is still flowing out of the North Sea. There is at least another 50 to 70 years worth left there, not to mention all the new fields which are being discovered north and west of Shetland. So the future looks bright, and the reasons that we have high taxation at the moment are simply because the UK has got itself into huge debt. And those of you who hear from your friends that Scotland would have a massive £15 billion deficit, no, it wouldn't. Do you know why? Because the UK will not have a currency union with us. That means that all the bank debt that the UK has built up would no longer be our responsibility. We would be a newly independent country with zero debt. All the debt which has been accumulated by the UK government for the last, 70 or 80 years would be theirs alone, because they're denying us a currency union. If they deny us the use of the British pound, then we have no obligation to pay the British debts. It's as simple as that. In legal terminology, if they take away their currency, then we take away our responsibility for their debts. So Scotland will start with a clean slate, loaded to the gunnels with oil, gas and billions of pounds worth of renewable energy to sell abroad. And its own currency, the Scottish pound, will be, right from the beginning, the currency that we use. And why would you want to change the name?